Isaiah never asked to be a hero, but when a wounded Apache girl clutched a secret that could shatter the town, he had no choice but to fight. Raiders closing in, a corrupt sheriff pulling strings, and a town that would sell its soul to keep the truth buried. Isaiah had to make a choice. Help the girl or let her vanish into the dark. But what's hidden in her pouch is more than just a dangerous secret. It's a weapon that could tear the town apart. As the storm rages and the clock ticks down, Isaiah must decide. Will he expose the truth, or will he be forced to bury it forever? The stakes are high, and the fight for justice is just beginning. Stay with us till the end. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit the bell for more Western tales. Snow had a way of swallowing sound out on the rim country, the kind of holy stillness that made a man wonder if the Lord was holding his breath above the pines. Isaiah Boone rode through it with his collar up and his eyes narrowed, scanning the pale wash of Christmas morning for trouble he could feel before he could name. Trouble had a shape. Trouble had footsteps. Trouble breathed. He found her at the bend where the creek froze into white glass. A small shape, collapsed against a rock. Bare legs, thin arms, dark braids stiff with frost. The child lay half buried in drifted snow, and for a heartbeat, Isaiah thought he was staring at a doll someone dropped on the trail, until he saw the blood. Thin, bright. Too much for someone that small. He swung down without thinking. Big boots sank into powder. Cold bit his face, sharp as wire. When he reached her, she flinched, but her fingers didn't let go of the leather pouch she held tight to her chest. "Easy, little one," he murmured, kneeling. "You're all right now." Her eyelids fluttered. She whispered something in Apache, no louder than a breath slipping between cracked lips. Isaiah didn't know the words, but he recognized the fear. Fear shook the very air, even out here under God's quiet sky. He lifted her gently. She was light, too light, and heat poured from her like a dying ember. Fever, wound, long night alone. No child should spend Christmas bleeding in the snow, not in a world where the Lord still watched men's steps. Hoofbeats echoed far off along the ridge. Isaiah turned his head toward the sound. Not wind, not deer. Men. Riders. A few miles off, but closing steady, like they knew exactly what they hunted. He tightened his grip on the girl and looked down the empty valley. If he cut right, he'd hit the mining road, straight into the sheriff's jurisdiction, straight into Silas Kettle's hands. And Silas's kind always had laws ready for a child that didn't belong. If he climbed higher into the rocks, she'd die before the sun rose. "Lord," he muttered under his breath, "you're choosing for me again, aren't you?" The girl's hand twitched weakly at his coat. She hadn't let go of the somfsasun pouch even once. Isaiah shifted her in his arms, mounted up in one sweep, and headed for the only patch of light he knew would still be burning this time of year. The telegraph station 2 miles north, the place where Miss Evelyn Hart kept watch over messages meant for men fighting far from home. If anyone still had mercy left in her bones on a morning like this, it would be her. Snow thickened as he rode. Wind clawed at his coat. The child's breath hitched against his chest, shallow and quick. Isaiah guided the horse down the slope toward the narrow pass, keeping to shadow where rock broke the wind. Then, another sound behind him. Hooves again, closer now, faster, like men who didn't care what they trampled so long as they caught what they chased. Isaiah leaned low over the saddle. "Hold on, little one," he said softly. "We ain't stopping." They reached the pass just as the sun died behind thick clouds. Cold pressed in from all sides. He could feel the girl shaking in his arms and hear the ragged scrape of her breath. She wouldn't last long without heat or help. A lantern glimmered ahead, faint but real. Evelyn's station, the only warm door left in the valley. He pushed the horse harder. The station sat small and square against the hillside, smoke trailing from its chimney like a prayer rising slow and stubborn into the frozen air. Light leaked around the shutters. Isaiah thanked God under his breath. He dismounted, boots crunching hard on frost, and lifted the girl close as he climbed the short steps. His knuckles hit the door. "Miss Hart," he called quietly. "Ma'am, open up." Inside, something paused. Footsteps, then silence. A chair scraped. He knocked again, this time with the weight of the storm behind it. "It's Isaiah Boone," he said. "I got a child hurt bad. She won't make the hour." The latch shifted. The door cracked open just enough for warm air to spill out, carrying the smell of firewood and coffee. Evelyn Hart's pale face appeared in the gap, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp with the kind of fear only a long winter teaches. "Isaiah," she whispered, "what have you done?" He didn't answer. He only lowered the girl enough for Evelyn to see her. For a long moment Evelyn stared, at the blood, the braids, the pouch clutched like a dying oath. Then she stepped aside. "Get in," she said, "before someone sees." Isaiah crossed the threshold just as wind slammed against the door behind him, and somewhere out on the ridge, the hoofbeats changed direction. Someone was coming. Warmth hit him first. Then the smell of pine pitch and ink. Evelyn pushed the door shut fast, slid the bar across, and dropped the curtain in one practiced sweep, as if she'd been waiting for trouble since the first frost. "Lay her here," she said, already pulling the wool blanket off the cot near the stove. Isaiah set the girl down slow, careful not to jar the wound along her ribs. Fever flushed her cheeks, a deep, frightening red. Frost clung to her lashes like tiny shards of glass. Evelyn knelt beside her. "Dear Lord, she's Apache." Isaiah didn't blink. "She's a child." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She reached for her tin of salve, then for the kettle. Water hissed on the stove. She worked with quick, steady hands. Hands used to winter injuries, not bullet tracks. When she touched the edge of the wound, the girl flinched and tightened her grip on the leather pouch. "She won't let it go," Evelyn murmured, "even unconscious." Isaiah kept to the shadows near the back door, eyes on the windows, ears on the wind. "Then don't force her." Evelyn glanced up at him. "You plan on telling me who's after her?" "Men who don't ask questions." He didn't explain more. Wouldn't help. Outside, a board creaked. Boot on frost. Not close, but not far. Evelyn heard it too. Her breath hitched, barely, but her hands didn't slow. She finished binding the wound with clean cloth and pulled the blanket to the girl's chin. "What's her name?" she asked. "Didn't say." He wasn't sure she could. The fire popped. Snow slid off the roof with a soft, heavy thud. Every sound in that little station felt too loud. like the world was holding its lantern up to the windows, peering in. Evelyn stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and took a slow step toward the front window. She lifted the curtain just an inch. A lantern glowed at the far fence post. "Isaiah," she whispered. "Someone's out there." "Not someone," he said. "A scout." Evelyn's throat bobbed. "How many more?" He listened, to the wind, to the faint echo of metal shifting against leather somewhere down the road. "Enough," he said. She shut the curtain. Isaiah moved to the back door, checked the latch, pressed his palm to the cold wood. The girl stirred. A soft cry escaped her. Evelyn hurried back, placed a gentle hand on the child's forehead. "She's burning up," she whispered. "If we don't cool her down, she won't see sunrise." Isaiah's jaw flexed. "Where's your medicine kept?" Evelyn hesitated. Too long. He turned. Her eyes flicked just once toward the small trap door cut into the floorboards under the counter. "You locked it," he said. "It's not that simple. Unlock it." She stepped back. "Isaiah, if I open that, I'm admitting I helped you. You know what Silas does with folks who cross him." He didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "The girl dies if you don't." Wind hit the shutters. Once, hard. Evelyn closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the fight was still there, but something softer cut through it. "I said I'd never open that trap door for anyone," she murmured. "Not after what he did." Isaiah waited. After a long beat, she reached under the counter, found the small brass key hidden beneath a lantern base, and knelt. The lock clicked. She pushed the trapdoor open. Cold air rushed up, carrying the earthy smell of stored herbs and wrapped bottles. "Make it quick," she whispered. "If they see light under that door." "I know." He slipped down the short ladder, boots striking dirt. Her lamp followed him, casting thin gold on shelves lined with jars, powders, bandages, tonic bottles labeled in careful, feminine handwriting. He grabbed what he needed: quinine, willow tincture, clean cloth, and climbed back up. No sooner had he set foot on the floor than 3 hard knocks rattled the front door. Evelyn's eyes widened. Isaiah's hand went to his gun. The girl whimpered. A voice outside called, slow and friendly, in a way that wasn't friendly at all. "Miss Hart, you still awake in there?" The lantern at the fence post burned brighter. Someone was waiting, and someone else was coming. The knocking didn't come again. That was the first bad sign. Men who meant well always knocked twice. Men who didn't only needed once. Evelyn moved toward the door, but Isaiah lifted a hand, stopping her. He stayed to the dark corner where the stove light couldn't reach him, body angled, breath steady, gun low at his thigh. The girl on the cot whimpered, and Evelyn pressed a finger gently to her lips. A lantern swayed outside the window, its glow dragging long shadows across the snow. "Miss Hart?" the voice called again, too light to be trusted. "Got word someone rode this way. Thought I'd check on you." Isaiah didn't speak. The less the man heard, the safer they were. Boots crunched closer, slow, testing the boards of her porch. Isaiah could see the shadow of the man's hat move across the curtain. Another shape lingered behind him, taller, holding a torch that spit tiny sparks into the wind. Raiders rarely worked alone. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Just stay quiet," she mouthed. But the man outside laughed softly, as if he'd heard her anyway. "You keepin' warm in there, ma'am? Cold night to be by yourself." Isaiah stepped a fraction closer to the door. The child's breath rasped behind him, thin as paper. Her fever was climbing. He could feel heat radiating from the cot, even from where he stood. The man outside tapped the door with his knuckles. "Mind if we look around? Snow's fresh. Saw tracks coming this way." Evelyn flinched. Isaiah answered for her, by not answering at all. Silence was safer than a lie that could be measured later. The man shifted his weight. Snow groaned under his boot. "You got a visitor, Miss Hart?" Evelyn forced her voice steady. "Just me." The man paused as if tasting the cold. "Funny. Thought I saw 2 horses hit this road. Maybe more." Isaiah moved closer to the window. The curtain hid him, but the glow from the torch outside painted the frost with flickering orange. He could make out the raider's hand resting on the stock of his rifle. Casual, ready, hungry. Another boot scraped the ground. A second man had moved to the far side of the porch. If they stepped up to the windows, they'd see the lamp inside, see the girl, see everything. The girl coughed, a tiny sound, but in the silent valley, it cut the darkness like a blade. Evelyn's eyes darted to Isaiah. "Lord help us," she breathed. Isaiah reached the window and pinched out half the lamp's flame with 2 fingers. The room dimmed, shadows thickening, swallowing the edges of the furniture. The cot, the blood-soaked bandages. The girl whimpered again, but Evelyn pressed her hand to the child's shoulder. Outside, the first man spoke low to the second. "Check the barn. I'll take the windows." Evelyn's spine stiffened. She mouthed, "No more time." Isaiah held his breath as boots creaked over the wooden steps. A gloved hand gripped the window frame. Snow shook loose from the sill. The torchlight lifted, inch by inch, searching for cracks. Then, a horse's snort echoed from the fence line. Both men turned their heads. A third rider appeared on the ridge, lantern raised, signaling. The 2 raiders froze, reading whatever message was being passed in that silent swing of light. The man at the window cursed under his breath. "Mount up," he growled. "We'll sweep the creek bed first. They can't be far." Boots pounded away from the porch. Torchlight shrank. Hooves kicked up snow. Within seconds, the station fell silent again, save for the girl's shaky breaths and the low hum of the stove. Evelyn sagged against the door, palms pressed flat against the wood. "They'll be back," she whispered. "Before morning." Isaiah holstered his gun. "And next time," he said quietly, "they won't knock." Outside, wind dragged the lantern at the fence post sideways, as if pointing toward the creek, the direction the riders had gone. But they weren't gone. They were circling, and they'd just started hunting in earnest. The station stayed dark long after the riders vanished. Evelyn moved slow, careful not to let the floorboards moan under her feet. Isaiah stayed by the back door, watching the gap where cold air slipped through like a warning. On the cot, the girl stirred again. Her small hand tightened around the leather pouch, knuckles white, breath hitching. Fever glazed her eyes when they flickered open. She tried to speak. No words came, only a broken rasp. Evelyn knelt beside her. "Easy, sweetheart. You're safe. Isaiah listened. She ain't safe yet. The girl's fingers trembled. The pouch slipped halfway from her grasp, exposing a corner of waxed paper. Dark red seal pressed into it. Not Apache. Not tribal. Something else. Something a banker would hide deep in his desk. Evelyn froze. Isaiah, that's not medicine. That's a reason men kill, he said. She reached as if to take it, but the girl jerked the pouch back, clutching it against her ribs. Even in fever, she protected it like a heartbeat. Isaiah stepped closer. Let her hold it. She knows what's in there. Evelyn swallowed. And you? You know what that seal means? I know who uses wax that color. She looked up sharply. The name didn't need saying. Silas Kettle's signature read, the color of every foreclosure letter in the territory. Outside, wind scraped a loose shutter. The sound crawled through the room. Isaiah lowered himself beside the girl and eased the blanket around her shoulders. Her breath shook but steadied with each slow pass of his hand. She blinked up at him, eyes glassy but aware, too aware for a child half-conscious. She's trying to tell us something, Evelyn whispered. Not with words, he murmured. The girl's throat worked. Her lips parted. She looked at the pouch again, then at Isaiah, like she was placing a burden in the only hands left alive to carry it. When her fingers loosened at last, the pouch slid open just enough to reveal what she'd been guarding. The waxed paper folded tight around a metal ring. Gold, heavy, carved with a cattle brand Isaiah had seen before on Silas's ledgers. Evelyn's breath stilled. Dear Lord. Isaiah didn't touch it. Close it. Don't let the light shine on it long. Evelyn nodded and folded the pouch shut, hiding the seal once more beneath its worn flap. The girl sagged back, exhausted. Isaiah stood. If raiders saw her with that, they won't stop. They'll track right to this door. And you think Silas wants her found? Evelyn whispered. No. Isaiah's voice dropped to a hard, quiet edge. He wants her gone. A new silence settled between them. Heavy, time-wasting, dangerous. Evelyn broke it first. I can telegraph Fort Stanton. They'll send a marshal if they know a banker's involved. Isaiah shook his head. Silas owns the line from here to Ridgewater. Any message you send goes straight into his hands before anyone else sees. It's it. Evelyn's face tightened. So we can't call for help. We are the help. The stove flame flickered low. Shadows stretched across the child's face, carving hollows under her eyes. How long does she have? Isaiah asked. Evelyn touched the girl's cheek. Fever's rising. She needs stronger medicine. The kind Larkin keeps locked behind his counter. Isaiah watched her. Say it plain. Evelyn exhaled, slow and shaking. We'd have to take it. Steal it, he corrected. For her to live, she whispered. A faint crunch of snow echoed from outside. A single footstep, distant but certain. Isaiah's hand went to his gun. Evelyn doused the lamp until only embers glowed in the stove. The room fell into darkness again. She can't travel tonight, Evelyn said. If we leave now, she dies. Isaiah stared at the door, jaw set. And if we stay, he murmured, we die with her. The wind pressed against the shutters, Something moved out near the fence. Someone had returned. The child slept only because her body was too tired to fight. Fever pulsed through her like a hammer striking slow, uneven blows. Each time she exhaled, Isaiah could hear the weakness in it. Evelyn didn't say the word dying, but the room felt like it knew. Outside, the wind shifted again. Hooves, farther off this time, working the lower trail. The raiders were circling the valley the way wolves test a wounded calf. They'd return when the moon dropped, when the cold grew sharp enough to make doors tremble. Evelyn rewrapped her shawl. If we're getting medicine, we move now, before the ridge patrol loops back. Isaiah nodded once. Light low. Stay behind me. She grabbed her lantern and turned the wick down to a faint ember. They slipped out the back door into the deep cold, shutting it soft behind them. Snow crunched under their boots, too loud, even when they stepped careful. Isaiah scanned the ridge, scanning for silhouettes, shadows, torches. Nothing moved, but quiet wasn't safety. Quiet was bait. They crossed behind the telegraph station, past the shed where Evelyn kept firewood, and followed the narrow footpath toward town. The trail dipped between an old fence line and low sagebrush, the snow there thinner from the wind. The lantern flickered against Evelyn's skirt, casting half a ghost on the ground. Keep it low, Isaiah murmured. I am, she whispered back, though her hand shook. Down the slope, Larkin's general store crouched like a square shadow against the hillside. Windows dark. No lamp burning. Not since the sheriff ordered lights out after dusk for community protection. Isaiah could almost hear Silas's voice in that order. They reached the back door. Evelyn eased the lantern onto the ground and pressed her fingers beneath the frame. She exhaled when she found the keyhole. He keeps the medicine in a crate under the counter, she whispered. I'll be quick. Isaiah stepped to the corner and watched the road. Snow fell slow, drifting sideways in the lantern's glow. He breathed shallow. Cold air burned his lungs. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Then silence. Evelyn slid the key from her apron pocket. Small, brass, nicked at the edges. It took 2 tries before it turned. The lock clicked louder than she wanted. She froze, listening. When nothing answered, she pushed the door open a crack. The store was colder inside than out. Shelves loomed in the dark, tall as judgment. A faint smell of flour, dried beans, and lamp oil hung in the air. Isaiah followed her in, shutting the door behind them. The small flame from her lantern barely lit the counter, turning everything else into shape and shadow. Evelyn knelt, hands brushing the floorboards until she found the crate. She pried it open, breath shaking. Quinine, willow, laudanum for the pain. She's too young for much of it, but... Hurry, Isaiah said. She grabbed bottles, wrapped them in a flour sack to keep them from clinking. Her fingers were white around the glass. Suddenly, a creak above. Isaiah snapped his attention upward. Footsteps. Slow, heavy. Someone was in the loft. Evelyn's mouth fell open in a small, terrified O. Isaiah motioned her behind the dry goods barrel. She crouched low, clutching the sack to her chest. He moved silent between the shelves, gun drawn, each breath measured. A shadow shifted overhead, pacing, turning, pausing again. Then, a cough, weak, old. Not a raider, not a guard. Old Man Larkin. Isaiah lowered the barrel of his gun and exhaled. Evelyn pressed a hand over her mouth, tears brimming at the shock. Larkin coughed again, muttering in sleep. Floorboards groaned as he turned over in his cot. Isaiah leaned close to Evelyn. "Move." They slipped back toward the door. Evelyn lifted the lantern, careful not to let its light rise above her waist. She eased the door open, cold rushing in like a warning bell. Then, a crunch of snow. Not theirs. Isaiah froze. Down the street, a rider sat motionless on a horse. Dark coat, hat low, watching the store. Evelyn's breath nearly broke. "Back inside," Isaiah whispered. "No, if he sees the door move." The rider shifted slightly, as if adjusting his saddle. His horse stamped, snorting steam. He didn't move forward, didn't speak, just watched. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the sack of medicine. "Isaiah," she whispered, "if he rides to the sheriff—" "He won't," Isaiah murmured. "He's waiting for someone else." The rider lifted something from his coat. A lantern. He swung it once, slow, a signal. And somewhere behind the store, another lantern answered. By the time Isaiah and Evelyn slipped back into the telegraph station, the girl's fever had climbed higher. Her skin burned under the blanket, breath rattling like a loose hinge. The medicine would help, but only if the raiders didn't break the door first. Isaiah set the bottles on the table. Evelyn began preparing a dose with hands that shook more from fear than cold. "Hold her steady," Evelyn whispered. Isaiah eased the girl upright. She whimpered, clutching the pouch against her ribs. Even unconscious, she protected it like it was breath itself. Then a knock. Hard. Authority hard. Evelyn froze. Isaiah felt her breath stall. A second knock, louder this time. "Miss Hart?" came a smooth voice through the door. "Open up now. Town business." Silas Kettle. Evelyn's face drained of color. Isaiah stepped into the corner where the shadows swallowed him whole. He raised a hand. "Don't speak." Evelyn forced her trembling fingers to lift the latch only halfway. She cracked the door an inch. Silas's smile was soft as butter left near a stove. His coat was dusted with snow, his gloves spotless, his breath warm enough to frost the gap. "Cold night, Miss Hart," he said. "Mind if I step in?" "Yes," Evelyn replied, her voice thin but steady. "The girl's sleeping. I can't entertain visitors." "The girl?" Silas echoed. "What girl?" Evelyn didn't answer fast enough. Silas leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, pretending patience. Behind him, two men waited, deputies in name only, pockets lined with his silver. "Tracks on the road," Silas said. "Fresh. Someone rode in. Someone who didn't stop at my office first." "Plenty of folks ride at night," Evelyn murmured. "Not toward your place." He tilted his head. "And not without a reason." Evelyn tightened her grip on the door. Silas tapped his coat pocket. A crisp rustle followed, the sound of paper. "I've brought a warrant. Sheriff signed it himself. Allows me to search your property." Isaiah saw Evelyn's eyes flicker. Just once. Fear turning to something sharper. "Warrant for what?" she asked. "For aiding fugitives. For receiving stolen property. For harboring a child, not her own." Isaiah felt heat rise in his chest. Silas hadn't come to search. He'd come to frame, to shut down every escape route before morning. Evelyn swallowed hard. That's a lie. Truth doesn't win court cases, Silas said mildly. Paper does. He held the warrant forward, letting her see the sheriff's crooked signature. A real seal. Real ink. Real legal teeth. Evelyn's breath fractured. Isaiah could see the fight forming behind her eyes, fear wrestling with something older, deeper. Allow us in, Silas said gently. Make this simple. Evelyn stared at the paper, at the hand offering it, at the men behind him ready to drag her out if she hesitated too long. Then she did something Silas did not expect. She took the clung paper, looked squarely at the signature, and tore it clean down the center. Silas's smile died. Miss Hart, he said softly, that was a mistake. Evelyn lifted her chin. You want to search my home? Come back with a warrant that isn't written by the man trying to buy it. Silas stepped forward, but Evelyn forced the door shut. The latch clicked hard. Outside, one of his men cursed. Another kicked the porch rail. Snow shook loose from the eaves. Silas's voice came cold as the drifted road. You've chosen your side, Miss Hart. I hope you like what comes with it. Boots turned. Snow crunched. Lanterns swung. Isaiah waited until the footsteps faded down the path. Evelyn's hands finally began to shake. I just doomed us, she whispered. Isaiah stepped from the shadows. No. You showed him you're not his. Her breath shuddered. He'll send the posse. He already has. The wind hit the shutters, harder this time. The lantern at the fence swayed like someone had brushed past it. Silas wasn't gone. He was circling. Isaiah didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming. The snow falling outside had turned into a veil, thick enough to hide the road, but not the sound. Whispers, the kind that spread like a fire on dry grass. He heard boots on the porch again. A voice muffled through the thick walls. Open up, Miss Hart. It's Deputy Tom. Evelyn stiffened at the mention of the deputy. Isaiah caught the look in her eyes. She was thinking of the past, of promises she'd made and promises broken. Isaiah stepped closer to the window, looking out at the dimming sky. The lampposts along the street were already dimming, their flickers becoming fewer and fewer, like the town was being swallowed whole. Behind him, Naya still burned with fever, but now there were other fires to deal with. They're coming, he said, barely above a whisper. Evelyn moved, her boots dragging along the wooden floor. She ran her hands over her face, pulling herself together. A second too late, the door cracked open, and Deputy Tom's shadow filled the doorway. Miss Hart, he said, his voice firm but softer than Silas's. I got word. The town's buzzin' about a child and a man who don't belong here. Isaiah kept his back to the wall, his hand still resting on the doorframe. The truth of what had happened didn't matter now. He had no choice. There were too many eyes in this town, too many watching from behind curtains, too many ready to turn on him the moment Silas spoke his name. Deputy Tom stood just outside, his hand resting on the brim of his hat. You been shelterin' folks, Miss Hart? He asked, his eyes darting to the empty space behind the door. I've got no one here but myself, Evelyn said, a little too quickly. A long silence followed. Isaiah could almost feel the tension crawl up his spine. He had to make a choice, and there was no way out. Not now. Not yet. Then open the door, Tom, Evelyn added, her voice steady now. You want a search? You bring the sheriff. Can't do that, Tom said, shifting his weight. Silas told me to get answers, not ask for permission. And he's got a lot of friends now, Miss Hart. I'm just here to tell you it won't end well for you. Evelyn looked past him, her eyes narrowing at the line of men gathering down the street. There was more than one. Isaiah stepped closer. His voice was low, deliberate. You want to help? He asked, turning toward the deputy. Get out of the way. For a moment, Tom hesitated, but there was a storm brewing inside of him, too. The deputy's hand shifted from the brim of his hat to his gun belt. There was fear there, a lot of it. The wind outside kicked up. Snow swirled against the window, as if the whole world had begun to close in. I don't want to see it end like this, Miss Hart, Tom said, stepping back. His eyes flicked to Isaiah and then to the door. He lingered there for just a moment longer, as if weighing something. But you'll need to move quick. You got a couple hours, maybe. With that, he stepped away, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had come. The wind swallowed him whole. Evelyn closed the door with a soft click, but the sound didn't make her feel safe. Not yet. Isaiah stood in the corner, his eyes tracing the shifting shadows in the room. His grip tightened on the rifle in his hands. He had no choice now. The road ahead would be dark, long, and filled with enemies who knew how to pull strings. Guess we're about to find out what kind of trouble this town can hold, he muttered. Evelyn nodded slowly, and for the first time she didn't look at the door. Her gaze was fixed on something far beyond the window, something she couldn't control. We don't have much time, she said quietly. Not much at all. Isaiah didn't need to say anything more. They both knew that silence was the loudest thing they could hear now. The storm outside had no intention of stopping, and neither did Silas. Isaiah didn't move. He didn't even breathe. The crack of gunfire had barely left the barrel when the man fell. The snow, already turning red, seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, no one said anything. The man lay there, still. Eyes wide open, mouth half-parted, the snow quickly soaking through his coat, turning it darker by the second. Deputy Tom, now holding his rifle, stood frozen in the doorway. He hadn't expected this. Not from Isaiah. Not from someone who had only just been trying to survive. And yet, it was clear now. The deputies weren't here for justice. They weren't here for answers. They were here for blood. Tom's face was blank for a long second before he dropped his rifle, eyes darting to Isaiah. You made it real clear you ain't with them, Tom muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Isaiah didn't move. He knew better than to trust the deputy now. No more games, no more pretending. But then, as if all of it had just clicked, Tom let out a single, ragged breath. The man's dead, Isaiah, and you're the one with the gun. Isaiah finally spoke, his voice as cold as the blizzard outside. He had it coming. He wasn't no deputy anymore. The words hung heavy in the air. Like a weight on their backs, both men felt it. The silence stretched thin, and then the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin, like it was telling them to hurry. Time was running out. Evelyn, standing by the window, didn't flinch at the sight of the man's body. She had seen enough in her time. But that didn't mean she wasn't scared. "Isaiah," she said, her voice low, a tremor hidden under her words. "They'll be here soon. Silas. He'll want to make an example." Isaiah didn't turn to look at her. He was too busy watching the door, listening, waiting. There was no escape, not anymore. Deputy Tom shifted his weight, his hand twitching towards his own gun. But he stopped. And when he spoke again, it wasn't with the same conviction. "They'll blame you for this. You're dead if you stay here, you know that?" Isaiah didn't flinch. "I ain't going anywhere." Tom's face softened for a moment, the fire in his eyes dimming. "You don't have to die over this, Isaiah. You don't owe anyone nothing. Just go, while you still can." The words were as hollow as the snow outside. Isaiah wasn't a man who left. Not when things were like this. "Like I said, I ain't going anywhere," Isaiah repeated, his tone hard as stone. He turned his back on the deputy, walking away toward the corner of the room where the supplies were. Evelyn didn't need to say anything. She knew what he was planning. But she wasn't sure they'd make it through this. Not this time. The sound of boots in the snow grew closer, and Tom didn't need to say another word. The posse was already coming. Silas was pulling the strings from somewhere, and if they weren't careful, they'd be hung by the end of the day. "I'll see you out there," Tom said, his voice shaking slightly. He wasn't asking, and Isaiah wasn't answering. He only nodded once, acknowledging that Tom would be gone before too long. As soon as Tom left, Evelyn came up behind him, her hand lightly resting on his arm. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice more fragile now than ever. Isaiah didn't meet her eyes. He kept his gaze locked on the door, the window, anywhere but her face, because no matter how much she wanted answers, Isaiah couldn't give them to her. "I'm sure," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You go. Stay with Naya. If it comes to it, we fight together." And just like that, he was out the door. There was no turning back now. Silas had made sure of that. The wind slapped his face as he stepped out into the storm. The snow bit at his skin, sharp as needles. But there was something in the air now, something different. The cold was a weapon, and Isaiah had no choice but to use it. Behind him, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The storm raged on, but the silence in the cabin was louder than the wind, and Isaiah knew that they were running out of time. The truth would catch up with them soon enough. Isaiah's boots crunched through the snow, each step a mark on the hard earth that had been scraped clean by the wind. He didn't look back. The storm was picking up again, howling through the trees like a wolf chasing its prey. The cold was biting, but it didn't matter anymore. He was out in the open now, exposed. There was no hiding. He could already hear the raiders closing in, their horses' hooves pounding the frozen ground like a countdown. He couldn't outrun them, not with Naya in his arms. But there wasn't a choice anymore. Isaiah tightened his grip on the girl. She was feverish, her small body burning against his chest despite the chill. Her little hand clutched something tightly, a leather pouch that, by all accounts, should have been long forgotten by now. But she wouldn't let go. "Stay with me, Naya," Isaiah muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse. He felt her little head resting against him, her breath shallow, her heartbeat a distant echo under the cold weight of the storm. The girl stirred slightly, her eyes opening just a fraction. Her lips trembled, barely forming words. "We're gonna die, aren't we?" Isaiah didn't answer. He didn't need to. She already knew, but he would never let her say it out loud again. "Don't talk," he whispered. "Just hold on." Naya nodded, clutching the pouch harder, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. Isaiah could feel the weight of it, the cold leather pressing against his chest, heavy with a secret neither of them had the luxury of understanding just yet. The wind picked up, flinging snow in every direction. Isaiah's eyes narrowed against the sting. They had to get out of here, but the way forward was blocked by the jagged rocks ahead. The only way through was down, a narrow gorge that would lead them closer to the river and, if they were lucky, a path to the next town. But it was a gamble. He could hear the raiders now, shouting commands. They were too close. Isaiah's heart slammed against his ribs. There was no time for second thoughts. He moved toward the rocks, the path narrowing as they descended. The ground was slick with ice, and he had to be careful not to slip. The last thing they needed now was for him to fall and take them both down with him. As he descended further, he glanced down at Naya. Her eyes were closing again, and she had stopped clutching the pouch so tightly. Her small form trembled in his arms. He had to get to safety. He had to keep moving. Ahead, there was a crevice in the rocks, a small shelter from the wind. Isaiah made for it, hoping it would provide some cover, at least until the raiders passed by. He would fight if he had to, but not now, not with Naya in his arms. He reached the crevice, pulling her inside with him. The shelter was cramped, but it would do. He set Naya down on the cold, rocky ground, trying to make her comfortable. "Rest here. I'll be back," he said, his voice barely more than just a whisper. Naya looked up at him, her eyes flickering. She was too weak to hold on any longer, but there was something in her gaze that made Isaiah hesitate. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. And that scared him more than anything. "I'll be back," he repeated. His voice cracked this time. She didn't say anything. She just closed her eyes, the pouch still clutched tightly in her hand. Isaiah turned and made his way back toward the ridge, his eyes scanning the snow-covered horizon for any sign of movement. He didn't have much time. If the raiders found them now, they'd be finished. And then, in the quiet of the storm, Naya's voice reached him again. "Isaiah," she called softly, just loud enough for him to hear. He froze. His heart skipped a beat. "Isaiah, I have to tell you something." He turned back, dread knotting in his stomach. Naya's eyes were open now, fixed on him, as if she were looking through him. "The paper," she whispered. "It'll start a war if they get it. They'll burn my people, Isaiah. They'll burn everyone." Isaiah took a step forward, his chest tightening. "What paper?" he asked, his voice rough. "The paper I'm holding," Naya said, her voice barely audible. It's the last thing my people have left." Isaiah didn't understand, but he could see the weight of it in her eyes. The girl had been carrying something far more dangerous than he'd realized, something that could change everything. The wind howled louder, and Isaiah knew they couldn't stay here. But he also knew that whatever was in that pouch, whatever secret Naya held, had to be kept safe. For her people, and for the war that was coming. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing. It was far too important to let it fall into the wrong hands. Isaiah's eyes scanned the horizon, the storm still roaring as it swept across the ridge. The cold was biting now, sharp enough to cut through the layers of his coat and deep into his bones. But that wasn't what he was worried about. Not anymore. Not with Naya lying helpless just a few feet away. He had to keep her safe. He had to make sure whatever was in that pouch never saw the light of day. The thought of Silas getting his hands on it, on her, was enough to make Isaiah's blood run cold. But they had no time. The raiders would be close now, and they couldn't risk staying in one place for too long. He had to move, and he had to do it quickly. The darkness felt like it was closing in on him, the storm swallowing every sound. The wind howled, its icy fingers scratching at the rocks, sending them tumbling down the mountain. Isaiah felt the weight of the night press against his chest, the sense of urgency hanging over him like a guillotine waiting to fall. He couldn't hear the raiders yet, but he could feel them, feel the danger creeping closer with every breath. They were hunting, and they weren't going to stop until they found him. Naya shifted in the shelter behind him, her small voice weak but clear through the storm. "Isaiah, I don't think I can keep going." His heart clenched at her words, but he didn't show it. He couldn't. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. "You're doing fine, Naya. Just hold on," he said, his voice as steady as he could make it. He crouched down beside her, reaching into the pouch she still clutched in her hand. "I don't want to die," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Isaiah froze for a moment. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that they'd make it through this. But the words wouldn't come. All he could do was tighten his grip on her shoulder, trying to offer comfort without lying. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly, the words coming out harsher than he intended. He turned back toward the narrow gorge leading out of the rocks, his mind racing for a plan. The river was just beyond. If they could make it there, maybe they could cross and disappear into the mountains. But there was no guarantee the raiders wouldn't be waiting on the other side. His thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable sound of hooves. Heavy, rhythmic, closing in fast. Isaiah's pulse quickened. The raiders were here. He didn't wait. He grabbed Naya's hand, lifting her up gently, ignoring the pain shooting through his arm. Every second counted now. Every breath they took could be the last. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low but firm. He didn't need to say it again. Naya nodded weakly, but she didn't let go of the pouch. They moved quickly, making their way through the jagged rocks, their footsteps muffled by the snow. Isaiah kept his head down, praying the storm would mask their scent. But it wouldn't last long. The raiders would be able to track them soon enough. They reached the river just as the first of the raiders' voices drifted through the storm. They were getting closer. Isaiah's mind raced. He had no choice. He had to take them across the river, but he had to make sure Naya was safe first. "Hold on tight," he said, pulling her close to him. "We're almost there." The river was swollen with snowmelt, the water rushing fast and cold. But Isaiah didn't hesitate. He plunged into the water, the current pulling at his legs, threatening to knock him off his feet. Naya gasped, clutching onto him with every ounce of strength she had left. Her little body trembled violently against the cold, but she didn't say a word. She just held on, trusting him, trusting that he would get them through this. Isaiah's heart hammered in his chest, the icy water cutting through his clothes and numbing his legs. But he pushed forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the cold, ignoring the roar of the storm. They made it to the other side, gasping for breath, but the raiders were close now. He could hear their shouts, the sound of horses pounding the ground. He had no time left. "We've got to go," he muttered, barely able to keep his voice steady. They ran through the trees, Naya's small feet stumbling in the snow as Isaiah guided her forward. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. But he could hear them now, the raiders, their voices growing louder. He had to get them out of here. He had to protect her. And he would, no matter what it took. Tata. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that made even the snow underfoot sound like a gunshot. Isaiah and Naya were crouched in the shadow of the narrow gorge, their bodies pressed against the jagged stone as they listened for the faintest sound of hooves. The storm still howled, but there was something else now, something worse than the cold, something that made Isaiah's blood run cold. They weren't alone. Through the blur of snow and ice, Isaiah saw the shadow of a man moving silently along the ridge above them. His boots left no tracks, his steps as quiet as the falling snow. But Isaiah knew better than to assume the man didn't see him. In this land, a man who didn't leave tracks was a man who had learned the art of survival, and that was a man to be feared. "Stay low," Isaiah whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. He didn't need to tell Naya. The girl had already pressed herself into the rocks, her body stiff with fear, her eyes wide and uncertain. Isaiah's hand found his rifle, fingers tightening around the stock. He could feel the weight of it in his grip, a cold reminder of how quickly things could turn south. The figure above them paused, scanning the area with the steady gaze of a man who had seen far too much bloodshed. Isaiah's heart thudded in his chest. Every instinct told him to move, to run. But he had Naya to think of. He couldn't afford to make a single mistake. The man took another step forward, then stopped, his eyes narrowing as if sensing something wasn't right. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. For a moment he thought the man might have seen them, that this was it. But then, just as quickly as the threat had appeared, the man turned and disappeared into the storm, his silhouette swallowed up by the white haze. Isaiah exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. But it was short-lived. This wasn't over. They were still being hunted, and now they had to move faster. Naya didn't speak, didn't make a sound. She had been so quiet, so still, that Isaiah almost forgot she was there. But when he turned his head to check on her, he saw the little girl's face, pale and drawn, her eyes wide with terror. "Can we go now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible against the wind. Isaiah nodded, taking her hand gently but firmly. "We go now." They moved quickly, making their way through the snowdrifts, their steps muffled by the storm. The cold bit at Isaiah's skin, but it was the fear that gnawed at his bones. He had to get Naya out of this. He had to get them both out. As they crossed the frozen ground, the wind howled louder, the snow swirling around them in a blinding rush. But there was something else now, something worse than the cold. Isaiah could feel it, a presence, a sense of being watched. "Stay close," he murmured to Naya, his voice tight with urgency. They pushed forward, moving toward the edge of the canyon where the trees thinned out. The trees offered some shelter from the wind, but they also made it harder to see what was ahead. Isaiah didn't trust the trees. They were just another obstacle in their way. Suddenly, Naya stumbled, her feet slipping in the snow. Isaiah caught her quickly, his arm tightening around her waist. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. Naya nodded, though she didn't look up at him. Her gaze was fixed on something ahead, her eyes wide and unblinking. Isaiah followed her gaze, his heart dropping into his stomach. At the edge of the trees, standing like a shadow against the storm, was a figure. Isaiah froze. The figure stepped forward, and for the first time, Isaiah saw the man clearly. His features were weathered, his face rough from years of hardship. He wore a long coat, the collar turned up against the wind, and his eyes were dark and unreadable. He was tall, with broad shoulders that suggested strength. But there was something about him, something dangerous, that made Isaiah's instincts flare. "Who are you?" Isaiah asked, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. The man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at them with a cold, calculating stare. Isaiah's hand shifted to his rifle. He wasn't ready to draw, not yet. But he was ready. The man finally spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. "Name's Taza," he said. "I've been following you." Isaiah's heart skipped a beat. Taza. The name carried weight, a name known among the Apache, and one that carried a reputation. "Why?" Isaiah asked, his voice tight. Taza's gaze flicked to Naya, then back to Isaiah. There was no fear in his eyes, only something colder, something that felt like judgment. "She's not yours to protect," Taza said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "You think you're doing her a favor, but you're leading her to her death." Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. The anger simmered just below the surface, a quiet storm waiting to explode. Taza took a step closer, his boots crunching in the snow. Isaiah's finger twitched on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. "You know what's in that pouch," Taza said, his voice low. "And you know what will happen if the wrong people get it. You don't have a choice now. You're caught in this, whether you like it or not." Isaiah's grip tightened on Naya's hand, his thoughts racing. He knew Taza was right. They were in too deep. But he wasn't going to let this man decide her fate, not without a fight. "What do you want?" Isaiah asked, his voice hard. Taza smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I want what she's carrying, and I want you to give it to me." Isaiah took a step back, pulling Naya closer to him. He wasn't going to let this man take her. Not now, not ever. "I'll take my chances," Isaiah said, his voice low but steady. Taza studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You'll regret that." The words hung in the air like a promise, and before Isaiah could react, Taza was gone. He disappeared into the storm as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Isaiah and Naya standing in the cold. Isaiah exhaled, his body tight with tension. The moment was over. For now. But the danger wasn't. "Let's go," Isaiah said, his voice quiet but firm. "We've got work to do." And they moved on, the storm howling around them, the weight of the world pressing down harder with every step. But Isaiah wasn't about to give up. Not while Naya was still alive. Not while there was still hope. The storm raged as they made their way through the snowy streets, their feet sinking into the deep drifts with every step. Isaiah's breath was shallow, the cold cutting through his chest like a knife. Naya's small hand gripped his tightly, her face pale and strained. They couldn't stop now. They couldn't afford to. The sound of raiders' hooves echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Isaiah's mind was a blur. Taz's warning still hung in the air, heavy with the weight of an uncertain future. And the pouch. He could feel the weight of it in his coat pocket, its contents burning with importance. It was a secret that could change everything, a secret that could get them both killed. They reached the edge of the town square, the towering spires of the church visible through the snowstorm. The church. It was their only hope. If they could get inside, if they could get to the gathering, maybe they could expose Silas for who he really was. Maybe they could make a stand. The door to the church was ajar, and Isaiah pushed it open, the creaking sound of the wood cutting through the storm like a warning. Inside, the warmth hit him like a slap to the face, the smell of incense and wood burning in the hearth, mixing with the faint scent of the stale air. The church was empty, save for the handful of people gathered around the altar. They were all here for the same reason: to pray, to give thanks, to prepare for what came next. Isaiah's eyes scanned the room quickly. Evelyn was already inside, standing by the altar, her back straight, her eyes focused. She knew what needed to be done, and she knew that the stakes had never been higher. As Isaiah and Naya stepped inside, the murmurs of the congregation died down. Eyes turned toward them, their gazes uncertain, some curious, some fearful. The room was filled with tension, thick as smoke. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling against the walls of the church. Isaiah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to act quickly. He had to make the right choice. "Mr. Mercer," a voice said, cutting through the silence. Isaiah turned to see the sheriff, his face tight with suspicion. "You're late. Thought you might have been caught out there." Isaiah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, pulling Naya gently to his side. He could feel her trembling, her small frame quivering with fear, but she held his hand tightly, never letting go. "We need to talk," Isaiah said, his voice low, steady. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to ask for permission. He was here to expose the truth, to make sure Naya's future wasn't decided by men like Silas. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, but didn't say a word. Isaiah glanced at Evelyn, who stood silently by the altar, her face unreadable. He knew what she was thinking. She had already made up her mind. And now, it was time to make sure everyone else did too. Isaiah turned to the congregation, his eyes sweeping over the small gathering of townsfolk. They were all watching him, waiting for him to speak. He could feel the weight of their expectations. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. "I'm here," Isaiah said, his voice carrying across the room, "because the truth needs to be known. About Silas Kettle, about what he's been doing, and about what's in this pouch." He reached into his coat and pulled out the small leather pouch, holding it up for all to see. The room fell silent. The sheriff took a step forward, his hand resting on his gun. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Mercer," he said, his voice low and threatening. Isaiah ignored him, his gaze fixed on the congregation. "I don't care about Silas's money. I don't care about his influence. What I care about is this girl," he said, his voice firm, steady. "Naya. She's been carrying a secret that could destroy this town, a secret that Silas doesn't want anyone to know. But I'm not going to let him get away with it." The crowd shifted, their murmurs rising like a tide. Some were afraid, some were angry, but Isaiah didn't care. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. "I've seen what Silas does to people," Isaiah continued, his voice rising. "To those who cross him, to those who have something he wants. He doesn't play by the rules, and he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. But Naya doesn't belong to him, and neither does the truth." He paused, letting his words sink in. The sheriff was still watching him, but there was hesitation in his eyes now, a flicker of doubt. "You're right about one thing," the sheriff said, his voice tight. "This is dangerous. But you're not the one who's going to pay for it. You're not the one who's going to answer for this." Isaiah stepped forward, his gaze locked on the sheriff's. "I'll answer for it," he said quietly. "But I won't let Silas control this town any longer. I won't let him make the decisions for all of us." The sheriff looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're not alone in this," he said. "But you need to understand that this is bigger than you, bigger than Naya, bigger than any of us." Isaiah's heart thudded in his chest. The tension in the room was unbearable. He could feel the weight of the moment, the heavy burden of the decision that lay ahead. But he wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. "We're going to make sure this doesn't end in blood," Isaiah said, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to make sure that the truth comes out. And if it costs us everything, so be it." There was a long pause, and then the congregation stirred. Some began to stand, others hesitated. But in the end, they all knew what had to be done. The truth had to be revealed, no matter the cost. And then, as if on cue, the church burst open. The cold wind rushed in, but with it came the sound of footsteps. The raiders. They had found them, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Isaiah's hand went to his rifle, his body tensing. The sheriff stepped forward, his own gun drawn, his eyes steely. Evelyn moved to stand beside Isaiah, her face set in determination. This was it. The storm had come to a head, and now it was time for the final stand. Isaiah turned to Naya, his gaze softening for a brief moment. She looked up at him, her small face full of fear. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Something that told him she trusted him. He nodded, then turned back to the sheriff. "We do this together," he said quietly. The sheriff nodded, his jaw tight. "Together," he repeated. And then, as the doors slammed open, they made their move. The raiders charged into the church, their guns drawn, their faces grim. But Isaiah and the sheriff were ready. They weren't going down without a fight. The truth would come out. And no matter what happened, Isaiah knew they would stand together. Because in this town, they weren't going to let one man control everything. Not anymore. As the dust settles and the last echoes of hooves fade into the distance, we're left with a sense of bittersweet resolution. Isaiah, the reluctant hero, stood tall in the face of injustice, never asking for glory, but always answering the call of what was right. The journey of the Apache girl, Naya, and the sacrifices made along the way remind us all of the power of second chances, the importance of standing up for what's true, and the deep bond that can form between strangers when faced with adversity. This story, though set in a time and place far from where many of us live today, speaks to a truth that transcends time and space, that the struggle for justice, for the protection of the innocent, and for doing the right thing no matter the cost, is something we all can relate to. We may not all face the challenges Isaiah and Naya did, but each of us has had moments where we had to stand firm, even when the world around us seemed to be falling apart. It's a reminder that even in the harshest of times, there's room for hope, redemption, and the healing power of found family. Whether it's in the heat of a blazing sun or the quiet of a snow-covered ridge, the choices we make shape our futures and the futures of those around us. I know many of you, like me, have lived through your own stories of hardship, resilience, and triumph. We've seen the world change in so many ways, but the lessons of kindness, integrity, and courage remain just as important now as they were in those days on the frontier. These stories are not just for the history books. They are the stories of who we are, who we've been, and who we strive to be. So if you've enjoyed this story, if it stirred something in you, I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Isaiah's journey? What stood out to you the most? Was it the courage of a man who never expected to be a hero? Or the quiet strength of a little girl whose past held more weight than anyone could have imagined? Please, share your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy hearing your perspective. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales. We've got many more stories to share. Stories of heroes, villains, and the kind-hearted souls who make the Wild West the place it is in our hearts. Your support means the world to us. And by subscribing, you help ensure that these timeless tales continue to reach a wider audience. If you've enjoyed this story, consider liking the video as well. It helps us know what resonates with you and allows us to keep bringing you the best of Western tales that tug at your heart and remind us of the importance of doing what's right. As we reflect on Isaiah's choices, we're reminded that it's never too late to make a difference, no matter where we find ourselves. Whether you're a rancher, a teacher, or a grandparent sitting at home in your favorite chair, you have the power to make a lasting impact on the world around you. Let's all strive to be a little more like Isaiah, standing up for the helpless, defending the truth, and embracing the bonds of family, whether they are made by blood or by choice. So thank you for joining us on this journey today. And remember, in the wildest of times, it's our hearts that will guide us home. Let me know where you're watching from. We're all part of a bigger story, and I'd love to hear from you. The storm raged as they made their way through the snowy streets, their feet sinking into the deep drifts with every step. Isaiah's breath was shallow, the cold cutting through his chest like a knife. Naya's small hand gripped his tightly, her face pale and strained. They couldn't stop now. They couldn't afford to. The sound of raiders' hooves echoed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Isaiah's mind was a blur. Taz's warning still hung in the air, heavy with the weight of an uncertain future. And the pouch. He could feel the weight of it in his coat pocket, its contents burning with importance. It was a secret that could change everything, a secret that could get them both killed. They reached the edge of the town square. the towering spires of the church visible through the snowstorm. The church. It was their only hope. If they could get inside, if they could get to the gathering, maybe they could expose Silas for who he really was. Maybe they could make a stand. The door to the church was ajar, and Isaiah pushed it open, the creaking sound of the wood cutting through the storm like a warning. Inside, the warmth hit him like a slap to the face, the smell of incense and wood burning in the hearth mixing with the faint scent of the stale air. The church was empty, save for the handful of people gathered around the altar. They were all here for the same reason: to pray, to give thanks, to prepare for what came next. Isaiah's eyes scanned the room quickly. Evelyn was already inside, standing by the altar, her back straight, her eyes focused. She knew what needed to be done, and she knew that the stakes had never been higher. As Isaiah and Naya stepped inside, the murmurs of the congregation died down. Eyes turned toward them, their gazes uncertain, some curious, some fearful. The room was filled with tension, thick as smoke. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling against the walls of the church. Isaiah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to act quickly. He had to make the right choice. "Mr. Mercer," a voice said, cutting through the silence. Isaiah turned to see the sheriff, his face tight with suspicion. "You're late. Thought you might have been caught out there." Isaiah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, pulling Naya gently to his side. He could feel her trembling, her small frame quivering with fear, but she held his hand tightly, never letting go. "We need to talk," Isaiah said, his voice low, steady. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to ask for permission. He was here to expose the truth, to make sure Naya's future wasn't decided by men like Silas. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, but didn't say a word. Isaiah glanced at Evelyn, who stood silently by the altar, her face unreadable. He knew what she was thinking. She had already made up her mind. And now, it was time to make sure everyone else did too. Isaiah turned to the congregation, his eyes sweeping over the small gathering of townsfolk. They were all watching him, waiting for him to speak. He could feel the weight of their expectations. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. "I'm here," Isaiah said, his voice carrying across the room, "because the truth needs to be known. About Silas Kettle, about what he's been doing, and about what's in this pouch." He reached into his coat and pulled out the small leather pouch, holding it up for all to see. The room fell silent. The sheriff took a step forward, his hand resting on his gun. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Mercer," he said, his voice low and threatening. Isaiah ignored him, his gaze fixed on the congregation. "I don't care about Silas's money. I don't care about his influence. What I care about is this girl," he said, his voice firm, steady. "Naya. She's been carrying a secret that could destroy this town, a secret that Silas doesn't want anyone to know. But I'm not going to let him get away with it." The crowd shifted, their murmurs rising like a tide. Some were afraid, some were angry, but Isaiah didn't care. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. "I've seen what Silas does to people," Isaiah continued, his voice rising. "To those who cross him, to those who have something he wants. He doesn't play by the rules, and he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. But Naya doesn't belong to him, and neither does the truth. He paused, letting his words sink in. The sheriff was still watching him, but there was hesitation in his eyes now, a flicker of doubt. "You're right about one thing," the sheriff said, his voice tight. "This is dangerous. But you're not the one who's going to pay for it. You're not the one who's going to answer for this." Isaiah stepped forward, his gaze locked on the sheriff's. "I'll answer for it," he said quietly. "But I won't let Silas control this town any longer. I won't let him make the decisions for all of us." The sheriff looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're not alone in this," he said. "But you need to understand that this is bigger than you, bigger than Naya, bigger than any of us." Isaiah's heart thudded in his chest. The tension in the room was unbearable. He could feel the weight of the moment, the heavy burden of the decision that lay ahead. But he wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. "We're going to make sure this doesn't end in blood," Isaiah said, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to make sure that the truth comes out. And if it costs us everything, so be it." There was a long pause, and then the congregation stirred. Some began to stand, others hesitated. But in the end, they all knew what had to be done. The truth had to be revealed, no matter the cost. And then, as if on cue, the church burst open. The cold wind rushed in, but with it came the sound of footsteps. The raiders. They had found them, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Isaiah's hand went to his rifle, his body tensing. The sheriff stepped forward,